All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and we're talking to ourselves just at the moment because we're waiting for folks to rejoin us here if they possibly can after that aborted opening on the last one with our bad sound. We're going to give it just a moment for people to show up, and hopefully they will. If not, then don't know. All right, we got a couple people coming in. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Sorry for the sound problems earlier. I hope it's a little bit better now. Please pop in the chat, let people know we're alive. I'm seeing the counters start to tick up, but we'll figure this one out. Brian, oh, it's great to see you, man. I do not know a good way for folks to, if you have horrific sound crash problems like we had before, I do not know a good way to reset the stream and not just completely have to start over on StreamYard. But I guess we're getting an education. All right, folks are coming in. Thank you all for joining us here. And let's take the show. We'll get going, and we'll take it from there. I'll talk comic basy things beforehand, and we'll get onto things as we go. Anyway, guys, welcome to the world of live podcasting. I am your host, Pete Bickford. I'm the guy who made ComicBase. On most days, I'm usually a bit more organized on this one. We were, as usual, working up until about 5 minutes before show, trying to handle different things with the actual business because I do have that as my job most days. But I need to do this podcast thing now and again just to keep things interesting. I'm going to take the headphones off because I think we've diagnosed the sound issues. It's a combination of having the brand new switcher that the replacement for our old one came in, and we thought we had it all rigged up and ready to go, and at some point someone hit a button on our mic and reset all our presets out, so it blew all the levels out to death. Anyway, at some point I will find a way to reload those back up, and we should be better. But anyway, thank you all for joining us. All right, so the show today is all about entering comic books. That is kind of the whole point of comic books. Well, I mean, not really the point, but it's the thing you do more than any other thing in ComicBase is enter your books in. The thing you want to get out at the end of the day typically is you want to know, well, can I find those books I'm looking for? Can I have a handle on what I'm missing that I need to get? Can I get some kind of insurance coverage for my collection? Can I, leave a list if I want to sell the whole thing? But the major occupation you do when you're actually using the program for one reason or another is you're entering your books in. So we'll be talking a lot about that. I'm going to go beyond the standard kind of 5 ways to enter your books fast, which I am going to make a video on that. But we're not only going to handle those sorts of things, but I also want to talk about just the strategy of how to handle a large collection. We get a lot of calls every week from folks who are somehow they're inflicted with the task of my husband died, or my brother left me this huge collection of comic books, something you might not even be a comic book fan yourself, but suddenly you've got this wall of comic books just to deal with, or this huge collection of comic boxes which you suspect might be worth looking through, or they might be worth a lot of money, or maybe you suspect they're garbage, but one way or another you want to know. And how do you take on that sort of big collection? And for us, more experienced comic collectors, what are some tips just to organize our collection so that it's not a misery to deal with on a daily basis? So we want to be going into some of that. Before we do, however, I want to take a few minutes and talk about some of the things that we've been doing with ComicBase and Atomic Avenue over the last week, just to give you a quick idea with what's new. Main thing with Atomic Avenue, we're still continuing our work to migrate our payments on PayPal and to the new PayPal payments flow that works ongoing. We're also looking at some alternatives to PayPal for the credit card processing. PayPal is not the most competitive service on that, and we have other misgivings about PayPal of late entering into the realm of politics, among other things. But we talked about some of that last week. So that work is ongoing. In the meantime, however, we have done a couple things on Atomic Avenue in particular to make it a bit friendlier to use with mobile devices. So please, as we go through this stuff, give feedback to, you can give, I'm involved with the process, so feel free to give feedback to me at pbickford@human-computing.com, or if more generally, if you want to give feedback for Atomic Avenue, if you want to send them notes at their forums at forums.atomicavenue.com, or if you want to write their tech support guys and let them know about whether things are working, yes or no, for them. Support@atomicavenue.com is their email address. But like I say, because I'm involved in the effort, I'm happy just to field your, any question I can't answer just directly. So let us know how that's working. So that's the Atomic Avenue side of things. Now, on the ComicBase side of things, I was going to say it's going to be a quiet week, except it wound up not being at the last minute. So we wound up addressing with today. You might have seen that there have been a number of preliminary builds come out. These are, well, they're really interim builds. So we have the big quarterly roll-ups once a month or once every quarter, which have all basically it's a collection of all the features we've added, all the bugs we fixed, everything else that's happened. We try not to blast those out too frequently to everyone in ComicBase land because it's exhausting. But we are constantly on a daily basis fixing things and tweaking things behind the scenes, and so there are a number of things that are going on there that are probably of note. So in no particular order of importance, we had an issue that just resolved right before showtime with if you have been missing your grades when you're looking at your a collection via the mobile app. If you've noticed that suddenly all your grades are not appearing in, and everything's showing as near mint when you're looking at your collection, that's resolved. It was unfortunately it was the problem of fixing something else with people posting like radically bad grades. It wound up not putting the right grades in the right place. So if the mobile app, if you are still seeing your inventory not appearing properly, just save a copy of a backup using Sidekick and give it half an hour, and you should see all your collection appear correctly now. Apologies for that one, because that one was me. It's the no good deed goes unpunished, because by fixing one thing I wound up breaking something else, and that's just the life of programmer, and I apologize to everyone who's inconvenienced. Other things that are going on, if you ever had trouble with the select issues dialog, we've done some tweaking on that one that make your life a little bit better. If you had trouble printing divider labels, we also did a fix to the auto sizing of the font on that one, because some titles are very small, like Thor, and some titles are very, very long, like what was it? Somebody or other's 100% guaranteed guide, Krista Shermott's 100% guaranteed guide to get anyone into comic collecting, or something like that. The title, it used to have the record for being the longest thing in the entire database as far as titles go, but what the program will do is it'll automatically figure out how to lay that out on a label, like no matter what size label you're printing to, it'll figure out how big the type would be and figure out the biggest it can make it without blowing over the edges. So we did some tweaks to the title divider label layout on that one, which if you're printing, especially on very small labels, should make your life a bit easier. So anyway, that all happened, and hopefully you'll enjoy those changes if they affected you. And we continue to push on and upward. To get those things, go to the ComicBase.com site, go to my account, and then registrations. Whenever you click the download link, you'll always get the latest version of the program. Or another way to get there is if you go in ComicBase, and let me see if I can flip over and show that. There it is over here. Let me switch computers. If you go in ComicBase and you go to the setup menu, go to preferences, and make sure that you have check for interim updates checked, because what that'll do is when you say, is there anything new in ComicBase, it will tell you about all these little things we do, and then you'll be able to see the update and get it from there. All right, let's come out of there and let's move on. All right, so thank you everyone again for joining us. I just want to say a quick hi to everyone who's managed to find us over at the other site. Brian was the first to get there. Of course, our mod is in the house, Gregor Hecht. Andre, great to see you again, man. Jeff Schultz. And yes, everyone says the sound is much better. Thank goodness for that. Let's see. ComicBase TV stream sounds fine on phone. Can't reload on PC. Weird. Don't know. Anyway, or I'm glad you made it. However you got in here, and we'll take it from there. All right. Well, let's see. Let's see. Jet City Comics. Thanks for making it here. All right. Says well managed to get back on PC with Chrome. Seems to do Fox wants to fuss. What? I don't understand. All right. Anyway, hi guys, and Ed, welcome back, and everyone. All right, so let's get to it. All right, so let's talk about comic books. So I always try to do these things from the standpoint of, like, if I were telling a friend and just kind of giving advice of like how to take the stuff on, what would I tell you? So that's a couple things come with that. One is I'm not going to recommend products I make any money on. I don't get kickbacks off of any of the things I'm going to say, hey, this was really useful to us. Let's just take that, everything I'm going to say, that about is just take it as that Pete really likes these for his own stuff. I'm not going to tell you use anything that I'm not personally using myself. Secondly, the whole thing is your different, your needs might be different than my needs. I mean, we have customers who literally have multiple $1 million comic books. We have customers who have warehouses full of Spawn versus Batman, actually not warehouses, aircraft hangars, if memory serves. Yes, true story. For one of our customers, we had to adjust the maximum number that you could have as a quantity, because we used to have it capped out at 32,767 used to be the maximum number you could put in the quantity field for any given issue. And we got tech support calls from people saying, well, we have more than that, like of a single issue. Yeah, we have. And they had managed to more or less corner the world's supply of Spawn versus Batman #1. I forgot how many books they had, but it was like 50,000-60,000 copies of that one issue. So anyway, but we have people in all different walks of life. So if something I'm saying doesn't seem to apply to you, look, like anything else, take it for what it's worth, and adjust thereabouts. All right. So that being said, when I get these calls from folks and who say, look, I've just, my husband passed away. I, have to catalog, his number, his comic collection, what's the advice you got? First thing I always ask is, well, first of all, how big is the collection? So, and they're like, how do you mean? It's like, okay, the number of boxes, and you kind of tell them about long boxes versus short boxes, and you say, look, all right, so if they're storing in long boxes, are the comics bagged and boarded? Sure, yes. So an average long box holds about 200 bagged and boarded comic books. So you count that, count the number of boxes you've got, multiplied by 200. That kind of gives you an idea of the size of your problem. And from there, I'll usually ask what era the things are from, because that plays a lot to do in some of the recommendations as far as how you're going to attack the collection, and also in terms of whether or not having picture reference is going to be super duper duper critical or not. Because if all you've got is 1940s comic books or 1950s comic books, and they're all mainstream superheroes, honestly, the actual mechanics of cataloging it aren't particularly involved. I mean, that's almost like the best case scenario on that score. The thing, so locating a series, I mean, at that point, there only was one Superman. There only was one Action Comics. You didn't have to worry about, the 73rd variant edition of issue number 213, or, whatever the thing was. That wasn't as much of a deal. What gets much more important if you have a collection like that is things like, grading and condition. But anyway, so I'll ask, the size of the job, what era are their comics from, and then we talk about, what's your goal at the end of the day? Do you want to hold on to these, or do you want to get rid of them? So, what do you want to do with the books so you get to the place you want to be at the end of the day? I think it's a Tom Peters line. It's like, begin with the end in mind. It's like, whenever you go into a big process like this, say, look, what am I trying to do at the end of the day? What's my goal at, finally of the whole thing? And if the goal is, look, I just want these things gone at the end of the day, I'd like someone to wheel up, hand me a bunch of money, and have them gone, you might take on the job differently than, look, I cherish these books and I want to hold them for my grandchildren. Then you might take a different approach to the way you go about things. But I would say figure out what you mean to do with the whole thing before you take it to the next step. All right, next thing I'd say is, and it's the last thing anyone wants to hear, is physical organization of the comic books. Like, where, how they are laid out in whatever you're using to store them is incredibly important. I mean, when you feel like the job is already too big for you, this is absolutely the last advice you want to hear. So if you can't act on it, just you're already overloaded and you can't cope, I understand. That being said, if you were just going to put a stopwatch down and record how many hours you spend doing the job, if the books are physically in some kind of organization, it's going to radically reduce how the time required to actually catalog the whole collection. So if you can possibly recruit friends, high schoolers, relatives, whatever you've got, to get the books into some kind of physical shape where, they are in alphabetical order, where titles are put together in one big line, etc. Yes, it takes time, but my goodness, is that going to pay off in the long run? It'll pay off in the filing, it'll pay off in the selling, it'll pay off in the inventory. Yeah, every step of the process, you will cut down the time required to deal with the problem dramatically, probably by an order of magnitude. if you can get them in some kind of physical order. So one thing in particular I'll talk about later on is I'll talk about just when you go to store the comic books back is how much time you save storing something that's in alphabetical order and you put it in numerical order within a title. It goes it's literally it's something like 1 to 200 times faster to find a comic book in a long box if you know that the title, that this is All Amazing Spider-Man and all the issues are in numerical order. Laying my hand on any particular issue of Spider-Man suddenly becomes something I can do in something like 4 or 5 guaranteed touches of comic books to get there versus an average of 100 touches to lay my hands on any comic book in a something where I don't know where the bins are. All right. Last thing I'd say is prep work is you're going to need supplies, which is before you even start anything else. Yes, I'm going to say, I'm again, I don't make any money off these, but I'm going to say, steel yourself for saying, all right, every comic book you've got is going to need a bag and a board. It's now if you are dealing with $100,000 copies of Flash comics or something like that, the rules do not apply to in quite the same way, which I guess is a short way of saying the bag you're going to put it in is going to be a very, very expensive Mylar bag, and you're not going to bother with the board, but you probably are going to invest in a safe deposit box. But for everybody else, when you're just talking about a generic comic book, and I have many of them behind me right now. Every one of these guys here is going to need a bag, which is going to cost you an average of about 3 cents, and a comic board, which is going to cost you on average about a nickel. So take the idea of the size of your comic books and add in, let's just round it off, call it 10 cents each for supplies, and go out and place a very large order with whatever your supplier of choice is. You're going to, if they're not bagged and boarded, you're going to need to know that there's a number of different sizes of comic books over the years. They start out with a very larger size. I believe this one counts. This one here, here is Golden Age size, and you'll see this quite a bit wider than a modern comic book. I'll put the two next to each other, and you see that the modern comic book, it's basically about an inch, or a better part of an inch wider than the comic books that they have today. So in between these ones, we had a couple different sizes where if you really want to match your bags to your boards, your bags to your comic books, you had Golden Age at the larger size. Actually, if you have any magazines in your collection, you'll need magazine-sized bags or maybe even thick magazine-sized bags. That's a whole other beast. But for comic books, you'd start with Golden Age for your bag size. Then they went to Silver Age. Silver Age is the 1960s, basically, in terms of when those were put out. And what they did is they chopped 3/8 of an inch off the width of a comic book, give or take. And then they called them current/modern. And sometimes because the books are it's about a quarter of an inch or or 3/16 of an inch difference between the two trim sizes. A lot of times they'll just sell you one bag for those ones and not try to make them into a thing. Other people like their comic bags to fit like a glove, in which case those are called modern, and that's the comic books that come out today are basically all the same size. Where you get into trouble with these guys is if they print a special edition like a 100-page giant or something like that. You need to kind of go to the next size up in terms of the bag in order to fit them in. Now, which is not to say if you're a non-comic collector and you're faced with the situation, you have my sympathy. This is already complicated and we haven't even started yet. I'm just kind of trying to tell you, what you're getting into. There is a lot of people will say, well, I know the Golden Age is going to fit them all, so can't I just stick them all in a Golden Age bag and stick them that way? You could technically do this, and your collection would look like garbage at the end of the day if most of it is not Golden Age. Comics really do look better if you put them in the bag and board, with a backing board that's the size that they are meant to go in. It displays better if people are working through it. It manages better. Frankly, your costs are going to be less if you buy as little material as you need to as you go. But so do make a initial survey of your collection to kind of figure out where the bulk of your action is. And then I'd say go to a place like Bags Unlimited or BCW and place a very large order for as many bags and boards as you think you need, and then add 5-10% and buy some more. Mix up the sizes. Don't buy, even if you think that everything he's got is modern comic books, buy at least one 100 pack of Silver Age boards, Silver Age boards and Silver Age comic bags. Same thing goes for the Golden Age. Just have 100 laying around. They're typically sold in packs of 100, because there's always going to be that one weird issue that comes up, and if you have no place to put it, that thing just stops your whole process cold. All right, so that's the bags and boards situation. Another thing you're going to want, probably, is these things are called title dividers. They're plastic. You can buy them, white. And typically, what I would say for people who are going to, store them, their books in comic boxes. I'm presuming that you have the same number of boxes you need. If not, get yourself some comic boxes. But the one thing to look for on title dividers in particular is buy what's called tall dividers, because what you want is, when these things are all closely spaced in the box, you want to be able to read the title off this divider while it's sitting there in the middle of a huge stack of comics. They used to make title dividers that were a bit, about almost half an inch shorter, which you'd kind of see the top of the words as you're browsing through it, and it's the stupidest thing I ever heard about. I mean, it's like saying, oh yeah, I need to get in there and muck around and mess with the comic books involved so I can even read which section I'm in. Do not do this. That's dumb. But that was the style once upon a time. For the last couple of years, every time I've had to, pulled the last of a run of comic books as I'm messing with my own collection, any comic divider that is not a tall comic divider just gets chucked. The other ones get, if I need to stick another label on them, they get, put into my recycling process, where I basically, take solvent and take the old label off. I do them hundreds and hundreds at a time because I manage a very large collection. But dry them out and then lather, rinse, and repeat. Anyway, you won't have that problem right now. Don't worry about it. But it will help you quite a bit if, and I'm going to say if, you plan on ever retrieving the comic books from your boxes. It helps immensely to invest in title dividers. Now, they do cost a bit more than the other supplies I'm talking about, but what it really comes down to is that whole mechanics of what I talked about with a long box is, if I don't know the contents of a long box, if it's 200 issues in random order, right, just then the math of the situation to find any particular issue in the long box says, on average, I'm going to have to look through 100 issues of that thing to have a 50% chance of having found an issue. Worst case, it's the very last one I look through. Best case, it's the very first one I look at. But on average, it's going to cost, I have to look through 100 comic books like this in order to find the one I want if I don't sort them first. Now, if I sort them first, then how much I have to look through the box is dependent entirely on the number of breaks. So in other words, if I take let's say I've got a comic book box and it's full of Amazing Spider-Man, Astonishing Tales, and the Avengers, right? So I've got 3 titles in this box. Now, if I have 3 title dividers and I've laid them right where they mean to go in the whole thing, then I've immediately cut down my problem space by the number that is divided in each title divider. So if I can just look at the whole thing, and I know it's both in alphabetical order, and I can just scan with my eyes to see which section it is, then it could be, even if I don't sort them into numerical order afterwards, if I just take all my Astonishing Tales and put them willy-nilly in the Astonishing Tales section, then my average search space is going to be half the size of whatever is in that section of Astonishing Tales. No. So basically it comes down to the bigger number of breaks you can have built into a collection, the faster you will search it when it comes time to pull them out. In our company where I've manage a 56,000 issue collection, we print a title divider for every new title. Whenever we pull the last of that title, the divider, like I say, gets thrown into the to be recycled section, and at some point every 6 months or so, we'll take 500-600 titles out, pull the labels off, dry them out again, and then they become new title dividers. But I have enough working stock that I can keep that whole thing going. But it is worth, even if you are meaning to kind of get these things out and done with, it is worth throwing at least a couple of breaks in each box, dividing out by at least a couple of things. Absolute minimum, put A, B, C, D, E, F, G is your title divider breaks. All right. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you to get, and again, this is before you even start the work, is get yourself a bunch of labels. So let me go ahead and just pull one I've done here. All right, so I did exactly one comic book before showtime, just to show what this whole process looks like. So here's Godzilla, Monsters and Protectors, All Hail King. And this is the comic book in the appropriately sized bag with a backing board. By the way, the reason you mess with backing boards is, well, couldn't I save myself a ton of weight and effort like that by just putting it in a bag and not messing with the board? Yes, you could, if you were never, ever, ever going to even slightly exert force on the comic book. Turns out a comic book, it takes, I don't know, 5-10 pounds of force at any corner, edge, or whatever else in order to bend the paper. As soon as you've put a crease in the paper, you've devalued the comic book. And especially as you're filing things, you're dropping them into large stacks, it's incredibly easy, because the comic book by itself has no structural rigidity. It's a big floppy thing. As a matter of fact, a common term for comic books that aren't graphic novels, so they refer to them as floppies. If I were to sit there and try to wedge this one in a bag and board into a stack of similar comic books, just filing it, there's an amazingly good chance that I would put any number of small ticks in the spine right there, once again devaluing the comic book, which again, for a regular comic book, maybe I only shaved 25% off of its value by doing that, but 25%, first of all, over a lot of comic books is a lot of money. And the other problem is that, some of the comic books that you might find in this collection that you've just inherited might be worth tens of thousands of dollars, in which case you're like, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? Why didn't I put a damn backing board in there? Yes, put a damn backing board in there. You want to get them, modern backing boards. I mean, this used to not be the case, but it used to be people would just cut random slabs of cardboard. I did that myself when I was very young. You take whatever lightweight grade cardboard you can find, stick it in there as a stiffener, throw it in there. That's not the way it's done these days anymore. Collectors, supply houses have specialized to the point where they're going to sell you the standard backing board they sell you is going to be just fine for even 10 years of storage for almost every comic book you encounter. If you're talking about a very, very expensive comic book, and set your own price, but I would say something like $100 and up, it's worth at that point going to some larger extremes to make sure that the backing board you use is, they call it buffered. It's got typically a calcium buffer to keep, because all paper, as it degrades, essentially becomes acidic, and that's what makes paper over the years. It eventually becomes brown, tan, then brown, then where it's in its final stages is it becomes brittle. So you don't want the cardboard that's sitting next to your comic book, you don't want it to be contributing to the process. And so what they'll do is they'll put a calcium buffer baked into the the printing process, essentially, where it starts out acid free, and then they also make it so it's really going to want to stay acid free if it possibly can. Now again, these things cost a little bit more per, but if you've got an expensive collection, worth looking into. If you have a huge collection of 1990s $2 and $3 comic books, I would not bother. There are people who care about everything, lovingly and beautifully. I think the whole thing is always a balance between your time, the potential damage that you're incurring by doing or not doing a particular step, and the cost of the goods themselves. And honestly, you got enough problems on your hands just with everything I've told you about, that I wouldn't go nuts. I wouldn't use Mylar, which is a material for making comic bags, which will not become acidic over time. And typically, by I say over time, we're talking about many years. But again, if you're talking about you're storing a $10,000 1940s comic book, yes, it's worth caring about this stuff. You're talking about something fairly common from the last 10 years. Don't make yourself nuts. There's time enough for that later. And you can always upgrade your bags and boards if you're feeling it later on. But very first thing I'd say, especially if these things are not bagged and boarded to start with, get them into a bag and board, because the number of things that can go wrong to a comic book it goes down dramatically the second you've bagged and boarded it. As long as that thing is sitting out there naked and everyone's sticking their mitts on it, oh my God, it's easy to damage a comic book. So don't don't play around with that. If your comics aren't bagged and boarded, that's the very first thing to do. All right. We talked about bags, talked about boards, we talked about dividers, and hopefully you've got some place to store them. If not, get yourself some comic boxes at minimum. Some bookshelves or filing cabinets is also an excellent way to go. But comic boxes are a perfectly good serviceable storage for the short term. If you're going to wind up stacking your comic boxes for any reason, do yourself a favor, have a look at a product called collection drawer boxes. There's some copycats as well, but I couldn't say enough to tell you to use or don't use them. A guy named Rich Vincent, I believe, is the guy who makes collection drawer boxes out of the Collection Drawer Company. Also a ComicBase customer, but honestly, I like him not just because he has excellent taste in comic software, but because his product is freaking great. Honestly, we couldn't manage the collection without them. The idea is basically it gives you a way to stack comic boxes on top of each other. And when you need to retrieve something on the bottom stack, you can simply pull it out like a file drawer. You don't need to move the 3 or 4 or 5 boxes that are sitting on top of it out in order to get to the bottom one. And that is absolutely the difference between having it possible to manage larger collections and not, is the idea that I'm not having to move boxes around in order to get to something lower down. So if that's makes sense to you for your situation, definitely look into that. All right, last thing I'm going to tell you, and this one is not particularly obvious, is labels. All right, so you probably saw that at the top of this one right over here, I've got what's called an identification label. One of these goes on every single comic book that comes through our business, and this was not always the rule at Human Computing, managing comic stuff. There have been times we didn't enforce that, or whoever was doing the comic books didn't do it. I'm going to tell you, every single time I have to fill an order or pull a comic book and it didn't have a label on top of it, I'm going to thank God that's gone. Is the only thing I can think, because the amount of time and effort required to file a comic book, which has a label versus not has a label, it's night and day. We timed out with a stopwatch, and it was something like 2.5 times faster to file a comic book on average. And this is, from a staff that works with comic books all day long. They on average could file the comic books 2.5 times faster if they had a label on top than if they didn't. And that was amortizing the cost it took to label the comic book, which was not insignificant. Because otherwise, if I'm just looking at this thing, what's this comic's title? Is it Godzilla? Is it Godzilla's first series, second series, third series? Is it Godzilla from IDW? Is it Godzilla whatever else? No, the actual name is, Godzilla, blah, blah, blah. Monsters and Protectors, All Hail the King, which then gets filed in alphabetical order in a particular place in the collection. But if I had to open up the comic book and stare at what's called the indicia, man, you're going to get familiar with this. Typically, if you guys don't know what indicia is, typically on the first page or two of the comic book, there's a bunch of little tiny print down at the bottom here, which typically in bold, the first thing it says will be the official name of the comic book. And it might be wildly different than the title that's on the front of the comic book. But once you've figured out what the comic book is, at least save your future self or whoever has to pull this comic book later, or the person who has to file it. Once you've figured out what this thing's called, hopefully by using ComicBase, you'll see, stick a darn label on it and put it right dead top center, which says in large print what the name of the title is, so that there's no doubt where this thing is, to file ever in the future. Now, if you're doing a whole collection at once, like for some reason, this whole collection, you're going to enter it all in and you want to then label and print it all at once. At that point, it might make sense to buy, sheet fed labels like Avery 4260s, Avery 4261s. You'll see them like that. You'll find them in office supply stores. They're very cheap. They're a fraction of a, I forget the last time I priced them, but it came out to something like, around a penny a label. To get those in there, you can laser print them. You do the massive amounts of them all at once. At our office, typically we don't mess with laser fed labels. And I had a long discussion with a guy this morning talking about just the mechanics of he's doing his collection, and he was having trouble with some stuff. One of the updates that we talked about earlier in the show. But when you're trying to figure out the quickest way to deal with your collection, the number of walks over to the printer to say, and now I need to load the next sheet. I need to start on position number 7 out of 30. you got to factor that time into your process. So what we have done, and it does have some downsides, is we've standardized in our office on what they're called dymo labels, where it's basically all the labels come on a roll, and we can very, very easily print one at a time, or just, we can print 30 at a time. They'll come out in one big roll, but it's very easy to print a single label and stick them on willy-nilly as we need to. That winds up being just absolutely key to doing what we do. The downside of dymo labels, I will say, the printers themselves are not particularly expensive. Matter of fact, for a long time, they were running deals where if you bought a bunch of labels through different places, they had promotions going on where they'd give you the printer for free. But I mean, the printers themselves run 50, 100, $150, depending on, which model you're buying. But I mean, they're not particularly expensive. The labels themselves are slightly more expensive on a per label basis. But as you'll see, the thing I'm always trying to conserve when I'm, doing my own collection here is I'm always trying to conserve my time. I value my time more than dang near anything. But also, and again, because I don't have the situation in my current office setup right now because I took my family, moved out by Nashville. But back when I was paying people on staff who were doing the filing and pulling of orders and things like that, I had to figure out, okay, they make an average of X amount with benefits per hour. And so then I figured how many of this, task can they do per hour? And then that becomes, my employee time to do the stuff. And all these things, it winds up, if you can save any fraction of a minute off an employee, it's going to absolutely overweigh, the cost of just about any supply you can think of that makes that happen. So pay attention to your own time in this stuff. And like I say, when we sat there and did stopwatch tests and say, okay, here are 20 random comic books. I want each of you to go and try filing them all. We're going to time you all down. All right, now here's the same, here's another 20 random comic books of similar, batch of the whole thing. Except these times, I want you to print ID labels on them after you bagged and boarded them and then file them. We were stunned because we thought, man, you don't have enough work around here, and you're making me print ID labels and then file them, and I got to stick the ID labels on, blah blah blah. They bitch about that, but when it was all said and done, the total time required to do filing, it was like 2.5 times faster to do it if they had ID labels on them. So yeah, there are things like that. Spend the money if you can to save the time. All right, I think we've covered the strategy enough. Talking about this stuff here, let's get on to the actual file, doing of comic books here. Mike, let's see. Mike says, worth mentioning, nowadays the indicia also shows up on the last page of a book. Absolutely true. Yeah, and depending on what publisher you're coming from, they may make you hunt high and low for the darn stuff. But yeah, you're looking, it's typically by wherever they tell you about, the publishing history of the comic book. A lot of times, it'll be on typically one of the non-ad pages because nobody wants to have their ad over the indicia. But yeah, you may have to hunt high and low for the whole thing, and all that time you spend hunting is time that really you're wasted. By the way, just to break down, because I've used it a couple times, that stat about it being about 2.5 times faster to file a labeled comic book. What would happen typically is if you had someone who's really good, they're like, yeah, okay, I know this is Batgirl. We're on the 3rd series right now. I know this one. Second, I see Batgirl number 223. I know exactly what series I'm going. These, again, we work with comics all day long. There's no doubt about that stuff. That was no problem. What would happen is those people there would be ever so slightly faster, with the whole process on average, until, and always happen in any stack of 20 of these, something like 4 or 5 of the comic books would have some kind of weirdly ambiguous title. It would either be, well, let's see, is this Guardians of the Galaxy 1st series, 2nd series, 3rd series, 4th series? It'd either be one of those things, or it'd be some kind of weird spin-off, or the cover title would change, but then the series didn't. Think about the Star Wars Dark Horse ones, things like that. And then, they'd have to, because again, they're experienced folks, they'd know to open up the book, flip through, find the indicia, scan through the whole thing, go, oh yeah, okay, it's this one, and that means it goes there. And the time required to do that for even like one book was well over a minute. And so all their averages would just go to hell. So anyway, that's like I say, once you've got the book in hand, slap a label on it, man, it pays off. By the way, a feature of the label, and I can't actually, we put this on there, but I can't actually vouch for it on a personal level, is we do give you the ability to print your own barcode, which will identify this particular issue. Should it ever come up in your life that you need to say, oh, hey, this thing's been laying out, where does it go? Even if it's a comic book that doesn't by itself have its own barcode, like say it's that Golden Age copy of the Flash or Looney Tunes or something like that, you can scan that barcode and it'll take you straight to the place later on. Depending on how you physically work with your comic books, this might be a real life surfer for you, or in my case, it comes up almost never. But we figured while we're printing the label, we might as well make that feature possible. So if you do, have a barcode scanner and you find that sort of thing useful, I find it doesn't hurt to print that on there. It takes just a little bit of space on the label, which I guess means that the type that it can use to show some of the descriptive elements, is shrunk up by the amount required to fit, them on the label still with the barcode in play. But I've always put them on, but I can't myself, because of the type of books I deal with, I can't swear that the barcode itself is revolutionary, but it's a feature. You could look into it. All right, let's see here. Ed says, "Are there non-in labels that don't fade over time?" Oh, what do you suggest? So, yeah, so the Dymo labels, let me go and you can imagine 'em. Uh, like I say, they're printed using a thermal process, which means that over time, what the printer's really doing, the printer never runs out of ink, which is kind of cool because the ink is kind of built into the label itself. But then it's also like, if you guys remember Polaroid photographs, over time they kind of fade yellow in age because they're exposed to the same composition processes that would have made them develop in the first place. So what happens with Dymo labels is they actually, you'd think that they get darker, but what really happens is they want it fading away if you go through years and years and years of especially exposure to heat that's above room temperature. So it's not a great like 15-year label. I was pulling the very first time we printed labels for my collection with ComicBase, and I just sold a comic like this recently. The price labels, I believe, have I don't know if they still do, but they used to have a date code embedded in the code of the label itself, so we could kind of tell when that label was printed, so we knew when our stock was getting old. We were young, we were idealistic, and we thought that, well, wouldn't it be great if you could turn stock with comic books as fast as you turn it with every other retail item? As it turns out, comic books are very weird, and you'll have certain things in your stock that, as happened the other day, will ride just about at, I mean, they'll keep their value for inflation, but not do a lot more than that. And I found from the code that label was printed in 1995. So, we're talking label that's pushing 30 years old. Now, it was laser printed and it was still sharp as daylight. I cannot say that about 30-year-old Dymo labels. 30-year-old Dymo labels, if they're readable at all, you're doing well. That being said, it's 30 years, or it's 10 years. You may not need it to be readable after that long. But they do sell fade-resistant label types. I can't vouch for them personally because we move through so much material that I'm sitting there going like, if I'm gonna print this label and I'm pretty sure it's gonna remain legible after 10 years, that's usually good for me. I can deal with it being a bit faded after that as long as I can still make out what it said. And so I haven't spent the extra money to buy their fade-resistant versions. I've also seen some very expensive label printers like they use on wine bottles, because the one thing I really miss about these ones right here, because I found that you can print the label. It's got a little thumbnail. I'm trying to do it in reverse on the camera here. It's got a little thumbnail of the cover of the book on it here, which you can kind of get from this thing here. Okay, it's black and white. It's dot matrix printed on an area that's under an inch tall. You can get like, this is the thing that has the big white thing in the middle. That's about what you get out of that thumbnail. It's enough so that you don't typically put the wrong variant cover on the wrong book and everything. So it's better than nothing. But man, it would be so much more useful if that was color. And I do not know anyone who's managed to come up with a thermal color printing process. If any of you guys know that, let me know. I am all ears on this, because we would spend money to make that happen. The closest we've seen is there are people who sell roll style labels for things like wine labels, like if you want to open your own winery or your own brewery. But even though we could probably justify it on the number of labels printed per year, it's not realistic in terms of what we're doing. So but yeah, that's the thing I wish it did that it does not do. I've seen people who print inkjet labels. They look spectacular, but it's just too slow, at least for me. I want to go faster than that. All right, let's see here. Other questions we got here. Robbie says, mentioned Golden Age comics won't fit in the standard modern comic book boxes. Oh, yes, absolutely worth it. So the same thing where, like, if you're going to shave almost an inch off of the width of a comic book over the years, it turns out if you want to store a typical comic box is sized basically so it'll just fit a Silver Age comic book. If you try to stick a Golden Age comic book in there, you will crumple the edges on it, which will, again, really ruin your day when you figure out what that comic book was worth that you just destroyed. So do not do it. There are Golden Age comic boxes, and honestly, that is where I would say if I had ones to go like that, I would invest in what's called short boxes. It's a comic box that is not nearly as long, wide, and heavy, but because you're dealing with so much heavier paper, just volume of the whole thing, give your back a break on those ones. And because unless you have just crap tons of Golden Age books, well, first of all, I'm jealous if so, but but for most of the rest of us, short boxes are the way to go if you have Golden Age books. Similar thing goes for magazine boxes. And by the way, they do sell drawer boxes for magazines, which is how we file our magazines in the office. All right. Richard Scott says, what? But I'm not sure what about. It says, is it possible to introduce a cover recognition process similar to facial recognition? We actually did an experiment with that a number of years ago. It was kind of cool. It was just, I mean, we do some things just as a tech demo, just because we can. And I think I want to say I've seen at least one other person, one other company tout the feature like that. What it was the idea of that I could, sit there, put my iPhone scanner up to this whole thing, and it could sift, the cover imagery on the whole thing, run it through essentially a fingerprinting thing. It's actually the same way Shazam works. If you guys have ever used that to figure out what song's playing on the radio, is it does what's called a fast Fourier transform to kind of fingerprint the digital signal off the camera to kind of say, well, this one looks like, and it will tend to pattern match things that have the same kind of structure, even regardless of minor differences in color and the way you hold the camera and things like that. So it's a really good tech trick for finding. Okay, so I took a picture of this one, and oh yes, this one appears to be Wildcats third series issue number 2. Where it misses critically is on things where it shares the same cover except not on details like the color of the logo or things like that. It would basically miss that stuff pretty regularly. If it's like the virgin cover versus the not virgin cover, that also oftentimes would depending on how broad the cover elements were as a part of the picture, it would be a problem. So forth. The main problem of all is just slow. You could throw a really big computer at it, and if you're searching through the imagery from a jillion things like this, it's nowhere near as fast as doing more normal ways of finding the book if you have a clue. Number one, of course, being just hit it with a barcode scanner if it's got a barcode, because that one's freaking fast. All right. Greg wants to remind everyone, yes, we have a dedicated thread in the CB message boards where we can request topics and demos, which absolutely do. All right. So I've teased this a lot, and my goodness, I feel like I'm running low on time once again, but I'm going to go through just some of the basics here real quickly, and I'm going to do. I swear to God, I am going to do a better video of just, how to enter your books quick and try to get this down to like a 5-minute running time for folks who don't know. But because we've kind of been talking strategy this whole time, I want to take more strategic end to this one. So what I've got behind me right now are a number of things I picked up at kind of a fabulous store called Great Escape. They had a 20% off the entire store sale this last weekend. So I went through there and said, is there anything cool? And yeah, it's their Murfreesboro location, I'm going to say, was not nearly as good as their Nashville location was in terms of this one. No offense, it just wasn't. But it still was like the kind of thing where, like, yeah, you could find stuff like this for like, $1.50. It's like, all right, how do I feel bad about that? It's like, and so. Oh, and I like this one here. It's a quick draw McGraw, and it's funny because it's a very nice flat cover, not a lot of edge damage, thing like that. But someone took the title very literally, and seems like they put, to me, looks like either a 22 or a BB gun hole straight through it. Like, I didn't see scorch marks, but it has the burst, pattern. Like if you guys, ever do target shooting, you can see the little target splits right there from where the object entered. So yeah, someone Someone practiced quick draw on their quick draw McGraw. Who knew? Anyway, and of course, some of the real fun ones here is, yes, I don't have a copy of Marvel Comics #1, but hey, I've got the Golden Age reprint edition Masterworks, and I picked this up for $18, so I'll take it. All right. So like I say, it all starts out with surveying what your problem is. Now, if your problem is, and let's take the hard ones first, and then we'll use the good ones. The hard ones are things like, I have quick draw McGraw here with a bullet hole through the front, right? How do I do this in ComicBase? Well, let's run through it. All right. So the very first thing I'm going to do with any of this stuff, well, actually, the very first thing I'm going to do is put my key up here so you can see me. All right, I'll try to sit there in the middle of the camera. So with the comic books like this, I'm going to, if I'm just being, doing the naive thing right now, which, used to be very, very useful and gets less useful the more comic book people keep on releasing the same titles under different publishers and go 83 different series of Captain America. But yeah, I mean, just the obvious thing is to say, all right, quick draw McGraw, and see if this makes sense. Now, if you look in the upper corner here, you see, all right, this is Dell there. All right, so there's a quick draw McGraw series by Dell. All right. You look at the, it's called the trade dress, which is the general look of the cover up here in that little preview area. Let me zoom in on that so you can see what I'm talking about. And you say, all right, this looks like, kind of the same kind of beast. Now, and here I am going to tell you, and I'll just admit it right now, depending on the, the number of comic books you've got, how big the job is and so forth, we asked this on the website, and yes, I do make money when you guys buy ComicBase, and we make more money when you buy the upper end version. So I'm going to confess the, I think, fairly obvious financial interest right there. Look, when people call me up and they say, look, I got 150 comic books, and they're all pretty modern, and where else, I said, like, hey, take the free one. If your collection ever grows, come look us up. In the meantime, Mazel Tov, move on with your life. We make nothing off that call, but hopefully help the world. Same thing goes if you got 1,000 modern comic books you want to inventory. You know what? The express version, $59, works great. It'll probably do everything you need to do, especially if all you want to do is get them indexed, move on with your life. You're not a comic collector yourself. It does the job. Buy the cheap version. It does the job. I mean, it's a very, very capable program. If you're facing either an awful lot of comic books, if your knowledge of comic books isn't just encyclopedic, so if you're likely to come up against things that you don't recognize or that aren't familiar to you, or if the comic books that you're doing are either very expensive or frankly very modern, I'd say in particular, do yourself a favor and at least consider looking at what's called the archive edition in ComicBase. The reason is the archive edition, it has, as you go up the editions, they become more powerful, they get more features, but the professional one is basically maxes out the list in terms of the feature set, in terms of the creator credits, all the things it does on that end. There's some very obscure things that you probably don't need unless you're like a retailer, things like that. But for most people, it'll have all the features you need, in the professional edition. But beyond that is this thing called the archive edition, which has 871,000, I think, is our current number. Cover images that come with it, and you can download them as you go. You can get them on DVD or Blu-ray, or you can just download the digital images. But the more, the important thing is we spent a kerjillion years, and we're always putting new ones out there, showing you the photo reference as you go, which really, really helps with identifying comic books. And where it really pays off is if you're in the area either of, I've got a big enough collection to have this be a big problem, and it's old, and I don't maybe know enough of the older series to be sure that I'm looking at the right one. Or if you're dealing with anything with modern comic books where there's just stupid numbers of variants for everything. I mean, do I have the J variant, the K variant, the L variant, the M variant? And it's just not that helpful saying, oh, what's the Micro Ringo cover? Can you tell? No, I can't tell. You got to show me a damn picture. So, if you're dealing with that kind of stuff, yeah, consider the archive edition, because again, at the end of the day, your time is going to be the thing that bleeds you out, and having that photo reference there is really worth something. So because I've got the archive edition, I'm just going to show the rest of this. So I've got a quick draw McGraw here. I think I'm on the right series. All right, and for the for that one, I'm just going to go down to issue number 4. Then boom, there it is. It's just like the copy that's in my hand, except this photo here, it doesn't have a bullet hole, and the one I'm holding does. Um, so that one, pretty easy to go. I to get there, I just typed quick draw, and as soon as I did that, very easily found out which series from the publisher, confirmed it by looking at the cover. All right, I'm gonna go type a 1 key on my keyboard right now, and if you look at that, that is gonna automatically set the quantity. And whenever you've got the whole line highlighted like this, if I type a key from 0 to 9, I can do it on my, if I type a 0, it'll clear it out and go 1 copy, 2 copy, 3 copy, 4 copy, 5 copy, etc. It's gonna set that number of copies is in stock. All right, now, and then I'm just crushing it here because I'm giving everyone all the news they don't want to hear when they've got a job that's taking over their lives. If you're dealing with older comic books, especially, you need to be just brutally honest with yourself and say, it's not enough to say with comic books, oh, this looks pretty good. Yeah, it must be near mint or new or whatever the thing is. It's not like that. And what happens is all the difference in the world in terms of the value of your collection relies on this condition field and getting it right. And one thing, and I had to tell someone just last week, I said, look, I know this is an overwhelming job to you, but trust me, you will not have the strength. I mean, I don't know anyone I've ever met in my life that had the strength to get through cataloging the thing once and then going back and getting the conditions right a second time. So I mean, if you take older comic books, you mark them as all being a near mint, you'll get everyone very excited, to buy your collection right up to the point they realize you said near mint to everything, at which point they're like, oh, crap. So you don't really know what you've got, do you? Because the difference between, say, near mint and that thing where you just dinged up the corner, it's probably a quarter of its value. The difference between Quick Draw McGraw and Quick Draw McGraw in lovely shape, but with a bullet hole in it, yeah, it could be, a quarter or less of the value. And, having your books entered of what you've got, but not knowing what condition they're in, honestly, it's almost as bad as not knowing what you've got at all. So I know you don't want to hear it, but do take the time as you go and get the condition right. The easiest way to, like, if you know the conditions off the top of your head, and trust me, once you do a bunch of these, you will know the conditions off the top of your head. The conditions you want to worry about are these main ones over here at the top of the thing. They used to be called like the Overstreet 8, and now there's a couple little split grades in this particular show I'm dealing with. But the basic idea is it ranges for all practical purposes between near mint and poor is where things need to go. Now, once you know what you're looking at, an experienced person can figure out just by, knowing 2 seconds looking at the book, is like, oh yeah, that's in fine. Oh yeah, that's in VG. That's, and they'll get it right. If you don't know what grade a particular book is in, the best thing you can do, double click on the issue over here. It'll bring up the detailed issue edit for it. Go over here by where it says condition, and you'll notice there's a little question mark. That will pull what's called our grading wizard. Let me shrink down the screen a little bit so you can see it a little better. And at that point, you just sort of go through and you say, well, what's wrong with this book? Now I could get, a little obsessed about the fact that, for instance, when I look very closely at this guy here, it does have a non-color breaking. Non-color breaking means that it's got the bend, but it doesn't leave a white line to disturb the corner here. I'm trying to move it onto camera here. It does have what's called a non-color breaking large bend right there, which would be the worst thing about this book if it wasn't for the bullet hole. Now, I'm going to say, so at the very least, I'm going to say things like, all right, so this says, moderate, 2-inch or less breaks. Well, this one's larger than that. So that would be a large creases or bends. So I'm already immediately down to good. And for it to get down below good to fair, and ironically, good in comic book world means not very good at all. To get down from good to fair or poor, poor, you practically have to rip the thing in half. Fair means this thing is really shot to hell. Bullet hole, I'm going to admit, is not part of the Overstreet grading guide. so I'm going to say what the nearest thing to this could be, and kind of interpret as well as I could. I'm going to say this is one that has just never come up in my life before. I'm going to say, at a minimum, it's a tear that extends through every part of the book. So that might be relevant. And if we talk about, well, this, not really the spine, the interior whiteness is fine. That's not particularly a problem. There is a stamp on the back, which just has when I look at it, it has a little date stamp on the back. That's not my problem. By the way, notice as I'm setting these defects down here, the grade isn't changing, nor is the description down here. It still says it's good because of the large bends or creases. Because these other things, if that was the only thing wrong with them, wouldn't knock the thing in there. Cut/missing coupons or interior tears. I'm going to say interior tears is probably the most applicable one, and I'm going to say that that one's moderate, half inch or less. So ironically, and even if I said that that's an inch or less, yeah, that's not enough to actually knock this thing down as much as that crease on the cover was. If I took away the crease on the cover, then at that point, this thing would be a VG book. So yeah, it's funny because the crease on the cover is still, despite the bullet hole, as nice as I could be to it, is probably what's setting the condition for this one. So I'm going to say, all things considered, we're looking at a good, they call it 2.0 on a 10-point scale. That's probably what we're looking at on this one, as close as I can make it. Which, if this thing were brand new, in perfect shape, it would be $40. Which, in good, it's going to be worth considerably less. What are we looking at here? And I'm sorry, if it would be worth $310 if this thing was brand new. We're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 in good. Let's say I want to be extra cautious. I'm going to mark it down to fair. Suddenly, you're talking about $23, which, you know what? I feel pretty good about the $2 I spend on this now. So bullet hole or not, I like you, Quick Draw McGraw. All right, let's take another hard one. Let's move on to some of the more common ones, and let's get out of here. All right, this guy right here, Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. Now, again, it looks like it's clearly from Dell, same place. So let's try the same thing. Now, in general, when I'm looking for a title, the trick on this one is use the most uncommon name part of it that you can find. Now, if I just look under Looney Tunes, right, the problem is, of course, it's been popular. They made a lot of Looney Tunes. Now, I can browse through the Looney Tunes matches and see if I find something like there. But as soon as I get down to Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, which, as I'm looking down at the bottom here, I can see is from Dell. Okay, I got the right title over here. And I can confirm that if I actually did open it up, stare at the indicia, and I'd see that the real name of this thing is clearly Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, not just Looney Tunes. All right, so let's go to Looney Tunes. All right, now, I see from this guy over here, there's no obvious number on the front of it, but I'm going to go ahead and put on my reading glasses, stare at the indicia for just a second. And right down at the bottom, it says Looney Tunes number 202. All right. Quick shortcut number 1 over here. You'll see we've got a bunch of Looney Tunes over here we could go through, right? And we could scroll through these, and get through them that way. But there's another way to go. I just bring my mouse back on screen. If I got a big long list like this and I just want to go straight to one in particular, I'm going to punch the F3 key on my keyboard. I'm just going to bring up the jump window. And at that point, I'm just going to type 202. I hit return. Give it just a sec here. And boom, run straight to issue number 202 in the list. I didn't need to scroll. And if you see what I've got there on screen, you see what I've got here. It's clearly the same comic book. All right, same process for looking at it. Again, I think I could call the condition right off the top of my head, but let's just go pull up the grading wizard for a sec. And all right, the cover 90% of the time is going to be what sets the grade at the end of the day, and you'll figure this one out. This one has, some ripping at the corners. It has a big cover bend on the front. Let's go add in our cover tears. The tears themselves aren't that bad. It's not a staple tear. It is an actual cover tear, but it is moderate staple tears, 1 inch or less, or 1 inch or less, moderate staple tears, or 1 inch or less cover tears. This one actually has the tears on the cover are less than half an inch, so that's going to be keeping it in the VG category over there. Flipping the book open, the paper is, it's getting towards what they call cream as a color, but that's pretty much about it. We got some writing on the back here. Someone had written 25 cents because it looks like once upon a time someone tried to sell it at a garage sale. And let's have another look here. The gloss is fine. Surface wear isn't too bad. No soiling to mark with. Yeah, no, I think you can make an argument for this one being VG, but I'm looking at, and again, here's where the harsh advice comes in. Grade every comic book like you're buying it, not like you're selling it, right? And I look at that again and say, well, yeah, when I looked at that the first time, that looked like a 2 inch or less, color break up there. But now I really stare at this sucker. It's actually larger than 2 inches, on the whole thing. So at that point, this thing just dropped down from VG to good, which then took it from about 35% of its near mint value down to about 20% of its value. Apply this guy down here, and this guy's worth about $1.50 now. So I didn't really score on this one the same way that I scored at on the Quick Draw McGraw with the bullet hole through it. I paid exactly, as it turns out, $1.50 for that one. I broke even, and honestly, I can give it to my kids. They'll read it and they'll have fun. All right. Now let's move on to some things that are a bit more typical, if you don't have Golden Age collections. All right. Got a copy of Marvel Comics over here. Look at the side of it. This is the Marvel, encyclopedia, Golden Age Marvel Masterworks, Golden Age Marvel Comics #1. All right. The way I'm going to find this guy, and I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way. I'm going to tell you how I'd really do it here in just a second. The old-fashioned way is I'd come up here and I'd say Marvel Comics. Scroll down. Marvel Comics subscription presents. And this is getting tedious. I'm not immediately finding it by scrolling down here. So I'm going to say, well, there's also the word Masterworks in there. So I'm going to go with that. Marvel Masterworks. And it was Golden Age. And there we are. Marvel Masterworks, Golden Age, Marvel Comics right there. Now, let's open up this guy up here. I'm looking at the side of this one. I see I have #1. The HC over here means it's hardcover, and boom, there again, there's my book right there. This guy is in near mint condition, so all I gotta do, punch a 1, I'm done. And at some point, I'm gonna get a chance to reread the first appearance of Human Torch, Submariner, and I think Kazar was the other character that was the #1 appearance in there. All right, so those were kind of like the hard kind of ones. Let's take a more normal day over at Casa Pete when I get my comic books in and deal with. All right. To feed the database, we buy comic books like a mid-sized comic store. So we get shipments of comic books in at our West Coast offices. A couple weeks later, they arrive out here, and I got to go get them scanned, bagged and boarded and filed in for the collection, which then they get sold out on Atomic Avenue when we're done with them. But once upon a time, I had staffers for this stuff. Now I have me. So and again, I value my own time, so I want to do this as fast as humanly possible. Fast as humanly possible means in this case, I get a barcode scanner out, and I go under here and I go add by barcode, or Control I is what I really do. I get out my handy dandy wireless barcode scanner. It's wireless, not so much because, well, in this particular case, I'm actually scanning it to a computer that's halfway across the room. In most cases, the wireless is just there so I don't snag the wire on something and drag the barcode scanner onto the ground. But what I'm going to do here, basically, and this is before these are bagged and boarded, because half the time the comic book, the barcode is on the back. Basically, it's going to go in there, hold the scanner, several inches away, whap at it, and as soon as it pops up there, I know I've got the one. All right. Now I'm going to do the rest of the stack. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm flipping comic books around in my lap as I go here. So let's see here. Just about done. Where am I doing here? There's that guy. And I think we got 3 more. 1, boom. Nope, 4. My bad. Yeah, we got the new Spawn. Which, by the way, kudos to Todd McFarlane. I would never thought I'd see the day where having a comic book advertised still only $2.99 would be a good thing. But you know what? This day and age, that's saying something. Proud of me. The guy runs a tight ship. He meets deadlines. He delivers a product that's consistent in quality. Whether it's consistently up to the standards you want, that's up to you, but it's at least the same every time. And and Tom Speed, by the way, says I earned a badge by using the Grading Wizard. Yes, there are badges hidden in the ComicBase program. If you haven't used them before, that's a good way to get them. Um, anyway, but yeah, no, he's on issue 334 now, and he's just did all those. So I just added 16 comic books there. It took me probably around a minute, something like that. Totals up the list down here, shows me all the things as I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to hit save, and at the bottom here, I'm say display issues after saving, and I automatically am going to print divider labels for anything new. We've been banging on about the importance of divider labels. We're just going to go and let those print right now. And then while that goes, let me go ahead and hide this. We're talking about comic boxes, but you notice that we got down here is now this is a list of everything I just added appears afterwards. Now, if I wanted to, I could go and I could highlight one or more of these things or hit Control A. I could go quick change. That's Control G. I could say things like, hey, for all those ones there, I'm just going to stick them all in box 5, or I'm going to do whatever else. You can set up a particular field for all of them at once while they're there. What I want to do instead isn't the quick change, isn't anything like that. What I want to do is I want to print labels for these, because you know how I feel about labels at this point. So I'm going to go down here. I wouldn't normally do this. Normally I would just slap F6, but when it's done printing those things out, it's going to print out identification labels for all those as it goes. Well, those print out. I would be bagging and boarding these things. By the time I'm done bagging and boarding them, I'm ready to go and just stick the ID labels as they go, insert the title of ours in there, and they're ready to be filed. My metric, all things considered, is when I'm acting like a normal person and I'm not running a podcast. My goal is every single thing I do with a comic book on the back end, I want the average per comic book to be one minute or under. So in other words, the bagging, the boarding, the labeling, and the filing, all of that 1 minute per comic book. So if I got 50 comic books to deal with, 50 minutes, and it's absolutely achievable. Now, there are some other ways to do it. If you happen to have a collection where, like, say, your husband left you Spider-Man number 300 through 350, and they're all near mint and none of them miss, you can just highlight them all at once, hit the one key on your keyboard, slap them all in at once. That if it turns out you've got that situation, that's even faster than using a barcode scanner. But if that doesn't apply to you, the barcode tends to be the win because, among other things, it took all the guesswork out of the process of which comic is this. I didn't look at a single indicia. I didn't even look at the comics. I mean, honestly, as I was scanning, I was lining up the next one to be scanned as I went. So, I mean, that part takes all the guesswork out. By the fact that I'm going to slap a label on the front of them afterwards, I'm also never going to worry about what this thing's called. And then finally it becomes really simple. So all things considered, that's kind of the system we use here. I'm curious what your thoughts are about how you guys do it, how what you do that's different. And honestly, if you guys have any tricks that you think would make it faster, I am all ears, and I will shout your names as we go, and give you any tips, as any credit for any tips you've got here, because we deal with so many darn comic books on a daily basis, that anything that takes the work out of my life, I am all about it. So, and I'm happy to share it with all the rest of you as you go. All right. And Gregory Heck says, does the ComicBase grading guide cover things like bullet holes? I approximated the best I could. The ComicBase grading wizard is literally, straight from the official Overstreet grading guide standards. They're industry standards, and so we're never going to not grade according to the industry standard, because it wouldn't be a standard if you did. But no, there is no knowledge to myself, to my knowledge of bullet hole grading. The best I could say that is clearly at least a half-inch tear of the cover it counts as at least a coupon cut, because there's some missing material, and there's on every single page is at least called a half-inch tear. So I'd say we approximated pretty good. It was interesting, though, that with all that said, that the large bend on the cover hurt the grade just as much as everything else. So there you go. All right. I think that is about it. Yeah. So we answered the question about the facial recognition. Yeah, it's another thing that people ask about a lot is, could you have a facial or a recognition program do the grading for you automatically? I'm not saying it couldn't be done from an AI standpoint. I'm not sure, once again, whether it's efficient. I mean, I think it might be useful on a very rough basis for people who are unskilled in the area, but honestly, the computer we all got in our head right now is just way faster than anything I've ever seen as a tech demo at figuring out what the grade is on these guys. Um, I mean, watch your local comic store if they buy comic books and they allow you to walk in and say, "Hey, I want to sell these 50 comic books." If you get a chance to actually watch them do the grading, you will figure out that they do the vast majority of the job very quickly. There will be certain ones that they'll want to open up, paw through, check for interior damage, do things like that. But if you're just sitting there and you say, "Hey, yeah, I got this Spawn over here. What is it?" You can tell instantly. You're gonna take a glance at the corners. You're gonna take a glance at the spine, flip it over for a second, glance at the back, and say near mint. Everything's sharp, everything's gloss, everything's fine, done and done. If you see the kind of typical damages we get when things arrive when they weren't packed right from Diamond, it's like, yeah, depending on whether that corner crease was half an inch or less or not, or whether it broke color or not, instantly it's fine, very fine, or if it's really bad VG, but you will know that very quickly. Now, when you want to get to the question of splitting half grades and things like that, which may make some sense if you've got some really expensive books, that takes longer. You need to be incredibly deliberate about it. And realistically, if you're talking really expensive stuff, it may not matter what the book really is. It may matter just as much what the the Comics Guarantee Corporation thinks it is. At which point, yes, you want to know what the book is worth. Take the extra time, use the grading wizard, or learn that skill. But yeah, it's worth the shot. All right, let's see here. Walt says, one thing bothers me about add by barcode: if you have a magazine-sized comic, it breaks showing the save comics, and there's no way to show no until it's too late. Yeah, that's fair point. So if you're scanning mixed media types, so ComicBase can handle books, magazines, newspapers, and comics. I'm going to say do them in separate batches if you're using add by barcode, because ComicBase can't display two lists at the same time. It can't show you both the comics and the magazines afterwards. I mean, you can add them all, as you go. I mean, if you just want to add them to your collection, go nuts. I mean, you can zip them in. But when you want to show the list afterward, it has to pick one. It's going to pick the first thing you scanned as the type of the list. I'd love it if we could find a really clever way of extending that out in the future to be able to say, all right, and here, all right, yeah, you scan some magazines, some books, some comic books. Here's the magazines, here's the books, here's the comic books. It'd be really cool if we worked some kind of mechanic for the interface on that one. Honestly, the interface is probably the gating factor on that, or for that matter, the interest. If that's something you guys really want, let us know, because when you guys indicate a lot of interest in things like that, we say like, oh, okay, it's worth spending a couple days figuring out the right way to make that happen. But yeah, adding isn't the problem. Showing the list afterwards is. So we can't mix and match the list, but maybe we can page the list. Maybe that's a thing. Let us know. All right. Let's see. Thomas B says, yeah, the quick draw, I think it may depend on who pulled the trigger. Yeah. Was it shot by someone famous? Is that, is that a, oh God, who's the guy? Is that an Alec Baldwin bullet hole? All right. So let's see here. Let's see. Could you prevent scans of a different type after the first one? Yeah, we could. I'm not sure that you want to. I mean, it really depends on how much of going to different media is a problem or not. Because, like I say, if all you want to do, we always have to teach people the trick of using the display issues after saving. So that's something that isn't on by default, and most people don't know about. And maybe if they don't print labels, then they probably don't even care. Maybe, but we can, I mean, you can add stuff to your collection all at once. You just blitz it in. You can scan every type of collectible we support all at once. It's the showing afterwards. It's the part that I think could use some fine tuning in some future release. But I'm not sure if we want to block it. All right, well, I think that'll do it for now. I hear people coming back, and we've show's been long anyway. Thank you everyone who showed up. Apologize for the late start on this one. We'll figure this one out, and thank you for bouncing over to the other live stream. Thank you also to our mod, Greg Hecht, and we'll see you all in the next one. I'm gonna, after I get done filing these comic books, I'm gonna head out of town and take myself on vacation for a weekend with my lovely wife. We're heading down to Florida. Gonna try catch the last of the beachish weather, and hopefully you guys will all do well and take some good time yourself. All right, guys, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.